Members of the committee, you have before you for your consideration House Bill 284. The clerk will read the title of the bill.
Mr. Chair, House Bill number 284, introduced by Glim, a bill for an act of title, an act providing that consent to a physician aid in dying is not a defense in a charge of homicide, amending sections, providing an effective date. Mr. Chair.
What is your pleasure, Representative Glim?
Mr. Chairman, I move that when this committee does rise and report after having had under consideration House Bill 284, it recommend the same do pass.
Representative Glim.
Members of the chamber, today I bring before you a bill that's about making Montana clear and sending a consistent message. Every year we hear about the suicide rate in the state of Montana, and we're at the top of the list, not in a good way. We've had bills already this session that have dealt with suicide. This one kind of deals with it a little bit differently, but I want to ask, is it really that different? Because what we're trying to send is a consistent message. Whether you're young, whether you're old, whether you're Native American, whether you're a veteran, all kinds of classes, we spend all kinds of money and try and have all kinds of programs to keep people from committing suicide. So, to be consistent across that, this bill, simply put, it eliminates that consent is a defense in the charge of homicide by a physician. Suicide by physician is illegal. Montana state statute says if you knowingly and purposefully aid in someone's dying, that's homicide. So what brings this to our attention is the Baxter case in 2009. It was before the Supreme Court, and the issue before the Supreme Court was manyfold, but the way that the Supreme Court ruled was very narrow. What they said is that a physician can bring as a defense consent to the charge of homicide. They didn't say that suicide by physician was unconstitutional. They didn't say that it was even allowed by statute, which it's not. What they said is you can bring that as a defense. In fact, one of the justices in the opinion said that the citizens of the state of Montana deserve their legislature to step up, take action, face this issue, and correct the law. So that's what this bill does. It's just consistency in our law. It's already illegal, so what we're going to say is that it's not a defense for homicide to use consent. There's a lot of history behind this criminalizing of having somebody help someone in suicide. Basically, a lot of it was brought by the Criminal Code Commission, and they have, if the conduct of the offender made him the agent of death, the offense is criminal homicide. That's clear. And the reason for, in fact, assisted suicide is a felony if the suicide is not successful. Even if it isn't successful, it's still a felony. And the reason for that is, again cited from the Code Commission, is that the Act typifies a very low regard for human life. The intent has and always has been that irrespective of whether one survives or dies during attempted suicide, the subject is subject to criminal prosecution, including physicians. The constitutional issue is one that is sure to be raised, questioned. The Supreme Court did not take up that argument, and the reason I would say that they didn't is because the Constitution Committee took up this issue, and in fact, they say that no proposed amendment was adopted or rejected without combined deliberation.
1 minute.
And there was no right to die in the Montana Constitution. I'll let proponents and opponents speak, and then we'll close. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Is there discussion? Representative Karjala.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the chamber. Today, I want to talk to you about one of my constituents. I'll never forget knocking on the door of a young man who opened the door. He was very, very tall. He had eyes that could see right through you. They were haunting. When I took a closer look, he looked like a skeleton. This was TJ Muchler. Some of you had the opportunity to meet his mother. I had the opportunity to talk to TJ in person.
Representative Karjala, no proper names on the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What I want to convey to you, though, are his words, my constituents' words. I'm not speaking on behalf of him. I'm sharing his words with you today. If you can think of the worst flu you've ever had, and you get the cold sweats, and then have someone stab a hot poker in your insides and just twist it around, that is what he said it felt like for him. He said, I'm asking the Montana legislature to vote no against any bill that could possibly take any of this, the option of medical aid in dying, away from me. His mother's words. He is not choosing to end his life. Cancer chose to end his life. And so all he's asking for is assistance in ending his suffering when he can't take it anymore. Folks, this isn't about suicide. This is about compassion. And I made a promise to my voter to speak on his behalf and represent him. Please vote no.
Further discussion, Representative Keough.
Mr. Speaker, members of the House, I'd like to speak to the bill. With due respect to the good representative from Flathead County, I'd like to give a different perspective on House Bill 284. House Bill 284 threatens to charge physicians with murder when they comply with their terminally ill patients' end-of-life wishes. House Bill 284 criminalizes doctors for committing murder when their dying patients die. House Bill 284 makes a compassionate medical practice a crime. I rise because I question if we really want this body to legislate how terminally ill Montana citizens can or cannot die. There is no evidence of the legitimate medical practice of medical aid in dying that it is being abused in any of the 8 of the jurisdictions where it is authorized, including Montana. 6 states plus Washington, D.C. have passed laws by ballot measure or through legislation. Montana is the only state where medical aid in dying was authorized through a court ruling. Our state Supreme Court said, and I quote, "We find no indication in Montana law that physician aid in dying provided to terminally ill, mentally competent adult patients is against public policy," end of quote. There is nothing in Montana's public policy prohibiting an adult person who is dying and who is mentally competent from seeking relief from the agony and suffering they will endure in their dying process. This one-page bill would change how physicians treat the terminally ill at the end of life. And it would deny Montanans who are terminally ill an option that should not be taken away. Some call medical aid in dying suicide or assisted suicide. And I'd like to set the record straight on that. My former husband committed suicide. It devastated our family and is a tragedy that my sons and I will never forget. His mental illness and other circumstances led him to think that death was his only escape from his suffering. He chose death over life. Let me be clear. Medical aid in dying for the terminally ill is not the same. The dying person does not have a choice between life and death. Their only choice is death. Medical aid in dying provides the person some say in the time and manner of their death and some input in how much suffering they are able and willing to bear. The difference between the grieving process for the family of a violent suicide is very different than that of the family experiencing a planned, peaceful act of compassion at the end of life. So at this time in Montana, physicians who practice medicine and deal with terminally ill patients are able to deliver health care that includes withholding or withdrawing life-sustaining treatments, such as a ventilator.
One minute.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Knowing that doing so will cause the patient's death. They are able to give patients who are dying what is called terminal sedation, which puts the person in a coma until they die. They are able to help a person through the process of stopping eating and drinking until it causes death. None of them are considered homicide, nor should they be. Medical aid in dying simply provides a dying person one more option to consider on the spectrum of end-of-life care. Passing House Bill 284 takes that option away, making physicians culpable when their dying patients request relief from their suffering is bad policy. Second-guessing physicians and the state Supreme Court is not our job. House Bill 284 is a government overreach into one of the most sacred times in a person's life, and this bill should be rejected. Mr. Speaker and members of the House, thank you.
Is there further discussion? Representative Woods. Waves off. Further discussion. Representative McCamey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members of the body, last session I carried a palliative care bill that some thought was to be a way to physician-assisted suicide. Nothing could have been further from the truth. When my 16-year-old son had suffered 3 years with cancer, he was wanting to live more. But we could only give him palliative care. And he would never want to have us do anything to shorten his life, but to extend his life if at all possible. Now, everything that has been said has been true. Some of these things are still in existence, and they can be used as tools. But it does not give us the right to allow for a situation to be. We did not ask to come into the world. We should not ask to leave the world the way that is by just a almost flippant decision. I cannot stress, if we value life, we either value life or we don't value life. It is really that black and white to me, members of the body. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Further discussion. Representative Bob Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Today I rise in support of House Bill 284. And as many of you know, as the chairman of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, we deal with some fairly passionate issues, and I'm very proud to serve there. But one of the greatest things, I really believe one of the biggest honors is to serve on the House Judiciary Committee. We are faced with issues from that really deal in many cases with life and death every day. And it is truly one of my greatest honors to do that. And when we start talking about life and death, it is very moving and very compassionate. And you hear stories on both sides of the issues of of why it is such a good deal, one way or the other. You know, why we should have compassion on this person or this group of people. We hear bills that deal with every walk of life. We just had a bill not too long ago that it was dealing with the exploitation of the elderly. We understand that. We understand that that can happen. And then in my personal life, not too long ago, my father died. Last session while we were here, my mother-in-law passed away. And as I talked to people about that, I started to get stories about how family members begin to take advantage of people that are in a compromised state, let's say, and how they begin to fight amongst each other, and how they begin to manipulate funds and everything else, and who's going to get this piece of property and who's going to get that piece of property. And my real fear in this is that those people who are in that compromised state will be taken advantage of. I know, and I bet you all of you, if you really think about it, could look back and find a story in your life where somebody had a misdiagnosis. We've heard those in our committee. I've heard them in my everyday life. I personally know one man who was cured of HIV. I believe in the power of divine healing. I know him personally, cured. Doctors couldn't do anything for him. I know another man who had a tumor on his neck, a cancerous tumor on his neck that was larger than a grapefruit. The doctors couldn't do anything for him. They told him it was a terminal deal. That tumor is now gone, and he is alive and healthy. And so I just plead with you, we do not know what life brings us, and we should not be the ones that are playing God. We do not know what our future holds, and we should let that play out. So I beg you for a green light.
Further discussion. Representative Manzella.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to speak to the bill. I'd like to speak in support of this bill. It's an extremely important bill. And just to reiterate and clarify, assisted suicide is illegal in Montana. The Baxter decision clouded the clarity of our law. Consent can now be brought as a defense for physicians. But let's examine how that would work exactly. There's no paper trail on the consent. The person wishing to give their consent, if things go as planned, they're dead. So how would a physician effectively use consent as a defense? I don't see it playing out well in a court of law. I think we should honor the Supreme Court's suggestion that we, as the Montana legislature, clarify our law. I'd also like to bring your attention to the Hippocratic Oath, which our doctors still take to this day. And part of that oath specifically states, I will neither give a deadly drug to anyone who asked, nor will I make a suggestion to this effect. We should not be using our doctors in this way. They are healers. They take an oath to heal and do everything they can to heal the human being that they are working on. We should not ask them to murder people. We euthanize animals to put them out of their misery, not people. There are souls at stake. Please vote yes on this bill.
Further discussion. Representative Beard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I speak in support of this bill. 12 years ago, next month, was the last time I spoke with my father. He answered his phone gruffly and said, I gotta go to the hospital, I'm really sick. My father took several decades to commit a long, slow suicide. alcohol-induced. We got him into rehab once. It bought him 3 additional years. 12 years ago next month, he went into the hospital and fell into an immediate coma. It was gruesome, but you know what? Through all of that, we had blessings bestowed on our family members, members who hadn't spoken with one another for decades, people who hated one another. And in that time that he was dying, in the last throes of his death, family members gathered together and healed each other. And these are some of the mysterious and divine blessings that are bestowed upon us in these terrible times. And we need to have faith and open minds that something far greater could be going on other than the immediate sorrow and inconvenience. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, members of this body, for hearing me.
Further discussion, Representative Woods.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the body. I'd like to talk about this a little bit different perspective here, one of both healthcare policy and privacy issues. As many of you know, my wife is a doctor, and every day that she goes off to work, I worry about her. I worry about her safety. She deals with a lot of people in mental health crisis. It's a very difficult job. She can get sued on any given day for any given day, because it's very easy to manufacture doubt in a court of law. That's a fact. So bills like this I find very chilling, and we have to think about our doctors. The doctors in this state, we have a very difficult time attracting them here. Oftentimes they have to be on call 7 days a week or many nights a week. The pay here is extremely low compared to other states. So bills like this make doctors like my wife wonder, why should I practice here? More important than that, since I've become a legislator, I've lost both my parents. And I've come to the conclusion that dying is one of the most personal and potentially one of the most beautiful things that can happen. However, it is one of the most personal things, personal processes that can happen. And we as a legislature have no business interjecting ourselves in that process. I'm a no on this.
Further discussion, Representative Rhonda Knudsen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. May I speak to the bill, please?
Representative Knudsen.
I rise in strong support of this. Like all of you, I've got a story to tell. Like many of you, I too have had a family member who was stricken with cancer. It was my mother, and it was 25 years ago. My mother died a painful, slow, excruciating death. It took months of being in the hospital, out of the hospital, home, back to the hospital care, hospice care, back home, back to the hospital. It's a painful, horrible thing for any family to go through. Sometimes my mother was lucid, and sometimes she was not. Sometimes she cried out in pain and said, "Please, God, end this for me. Give me relief. Just end it." Then the next day, she would recover and not know that she'd had that episode. So I ask you, which day did my mother give consent? Which day did she say, "Take my life"? I say to you, no day did she say, "Take my life." We cannot give consent, I'm asking you all to vote yes for this bill.
Further discussion, Representative Mortensen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will make this very, very brief, but I wasn't planning on getting up on this bill, but I would just like the body to remember a couple of weeks ago, I got up here and gave an announcement that my 87-year-old mother, who had been struck by a car, told the health care provider at the facility that she was at to just let her lay there and die. And today, I just talked to her this morning. She is doing wonderful. She's back to walking 2 miles a day and just has 100% recovered. So I'm going to be a big green on this. Thank you.
Further discussion, Representative Cheetah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the body, I brought this bill in 2017, so I have a bit of knowledge with this, and I think there's some things that need to be cleared up. Portions of what I'll say are facts, some are my opinion, but suicide in Montana is legal. You can end your life. There's nobody stopping you. So we have this conversation or confusion about what is compassionate and what is violent. And I would like to see a clear definition because I haven't seen one. Compassion means to walk with someone. I had the opportunity to be with an elderly Jesuit brother who died a very slow death of pancreatic cancer. I got to hold his hand while he went through that process and watch him go through lucid moments. He lived an end of life that to me was marvelous, but there were people with him that walked him through that process. And that's what I think compassion is about. It's not about just ending someone's life and saying, look, you think you want to be over it. There was a statement earlier that assisted suicide is legal in Montana, and it is not. It is a homicide. No matter how you spin that, it is against statute. We heard the good representative say, if you attempt to end someone's life and they live, you can be charged with a felony. And I believe it's up to 10 years in prison as a result of that. We've heard a variety of very impassioned conversations here. I had a variety of things I wanted to say, but the things that I want to say is, number one, we all begin to die the day we're born. And it's a matter of how you live each of those days through the process. It's not the number of days, and that's where human beings get it mixed up. God determines the number of days and how important those days are, and it's up to us to live those in that fashion. God is the author of life. We pray about that every day. We ask Him to oversee our lives. So in my estimation, it's time to clarify the Baxter decision and close the loophole that exists. And it'll be a loophole that will almost save certain individuals from fatal flaws in their life. Because we heard a nurse in committee admit that she has seen doctors over her 50-year career end people's lives without their permission, without their consent. So if anyone says that it doesn't happen, I think if we're taking that viewpoint, we would be foolishly deluding ourselves into a false narrative. So I ask you to support House Bill 284 because doing so is an act that protects patients from a variety of things, whether it's incompetence or misunderstanding, but most of all, it saves people from making a tragic mistake in their life that they can't undo. Thank you very much, and I would urge support for House Bill 284.
There being no further discussion, does the sponsor wish to close?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I'd like to say that I sympathize with everyone who has shared a story today, and those that haven't, because everybody probably has one. Yet, I still think we need to clear it up. The good representative from Bozeman spoke of worrying about the consequences. Right now, it's already illegal. All it says is that you can use this as a defense. That doesn't mean it's legal. We heard about palliative care that is completely different, and it's all about the intent. So I'm going to read to you the quote here. One who knowingly causes the death of another human being. Palliative care is to take away the pain that we're in during the end of life, make us more comfortable. And sometimes there's a question as to how much did they get? That's not this, because they didn't knowingly cause the death of that human being. What they're trying to do is provide comfort. Provide comfort for that person, ease them from their pain. Much different than knowingly causing and on purposefully causing the death of a human being. Very different issue. It's all about the intent. We had a doctor testify in the hearing that he didn't want to be charged with homicide. Well, to get rid of the loophole. That's what this is. It's a loophole. It's a loophole that creates the illusion that assisted suicide is legal in the state of Montana. It is not. I know we talked about how much suffering people have at the end of life. And it's tough to compare, but how do you speak to a young person who's contemplating suicide and tell them that their pain isn't enough? What they're facing isn't a big enough issue. It's a bigger issue when you're at the end of life. It's a very inconsistent argument. We as a state need to be consistent. It's already illegal. Right now what we need to do is clear it up. I ask you to vote green on 284. Thank you.
The question now arises on the motion of Representative Glim that when this committee does rise and report after having had under consideration House Bill 284, recommend the same do pass. Those in favor of the motion vote aye. Those opposed vote no. Are there absentee votes?
Mr. Chair, Representatives Gunderson and Ricky have voted aye. Representative Keene has voted no.
Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change his or her vote? If not, the clerk will record the vote.
Mr. Chair, 53 representatives have voted aye. 47 have voted no.
House Bill 284 has passed second reading. Members of the committee, you have before you for your